Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Facade. Drew Scott had always been methodical about protecting what mattered most. At 38, the former Marine turned cybersecurity consultant had built what everyone considered the perfect suburban life. His two-story colonial in Millbrook Heights housed everything he'd fought to achieve. His wife Miranda, his twin 15-year-old kids Emma and Jake, and the kind of stability that once seemed impossible during his 3 tours in Afghanistan. The decision to install the security system came after a string of break-ins hit their neighborhood. Drew had researched every option, finally settling on Sentinel Pro's comprehensive package: 12 cameras, motion sensors, and most importantly, 24/7 cloud storage with remote monitoring. Seems like overkill, Miranda had said, watching the technicians wire their home like Fort Knox. She stood in their granite-countered kitchen, her dark hair pulled back, wearing that distant expression Drew had noticed more frequently lately. "We're not exactly living in a war zone." "Maybe not," Drew replied, testing the app on his phone. "But I've learned the hard way that being prepared beats being sorry." Miranda's laugh held an edge he couldn't quite place. Always the soldier. The kids were more enthusiastic. Jake, ever the tech enthusiast, peppered the installer with questions about data encryption and storage protocols. Emma, more practical like her father, appreciated the peace of mind it would bring. "Dad's just being protective," Emma said, nudging her twin. "Remember when he made us take those self-defense classes? Which totally saved you, but when that creep followed you home from school," Jake countered. Drew smiled at the memory. The classes had been Miranda's idea. Actually, though she'd backed out after the first session, claiming she was too busy with her work as a pediatric nurse at Millbrook General. That should have been the first red flag, Drew would later realize. Miranda had always been cautious about safety, sometimes obsessively so. The installer, a middle-aged man named Earl Rankin, finished the final calibrations as evening approached. "Systems live, Mr. Scott. You'll get alerts on any motion after 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., unless you disable it. The cameras store everything in the cloud automatically." "What about accessing the footage?" "Real simple. Log into your account on any device. Company policy requires we keep a backup monitoring service for the first month, just to make sure everything's working properly." Earl packed his tools, glancing around their immaculate home. "Beautiful family you got here. This system will keep him safe." That night, Drew felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in months. The soft hum of the security system, the small red lights blinking in corners, the knowledge that every inch of his home was protected, it all contributed to the first peaceful sleep he'd had since the neighborhood incidents began. He didn't know it would be his last peaceful night for a very long time. Chapter 2. The Warning Call. Drew was reviewing quarterly security audits for his largest client when his phone rang at 11:47 a.m. The caller ID showed Sentinel Pro's service number. "Mr. Scott, this is Earl Rankin from Sentinel. I installed your system yesterday. Everything working okay?" A long pause. "Sir, I need to ask you something, and I want you to listen carefully. Where are you right now?" The tone made Drew's combat instincts flare. "At my office downtown." "Why? Are your children at school?" "Earl, what the hell is going on?" "Sir, I monitored your system last night as part of our standard protocol." Earl's voice was shaking. "I saw the 3 a.m. footage from your kitchen camera. I had to step away from my desk. Made me physically sick." Drew's blood chilled. "What did you see?" "I'm deleting the footage permanently. As a father speaking to another father, get your kids and leave that house. Today." "Why? What happened?" Earl paused. "Sir, what I saw your wife doing, stay away from her. I've already notified the police, but you need to move fast." The line went dead. Drew's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. Miranda had left early that morning for her shift at the hospital, kissing him goodbye with the same routine affection she'd shown for months. The kids were at Millbrook High, safe in their classes. He called the school first, using the family emergency code they'd established years ago. "This is Drew Scott, Emma and Jake's father. I need them released immediately for a medical emergency." 20 minutes later, both kids were in his truck, confused and concerned. "Dad, what's wrong?" Emma asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "We're going to stay at Uncle Sam's for a few days," Drew said, referring to his brother who lived an hour outside the city. "There might be a problem with the house." Jake frowned. "What kind of problem?" Drew gripped the steering wheel tighter. "The kind that requires us to be somewhere else while it gets sorted out." Before leaving town, Drew made one stop at an electronics store where he purchased a high-end laptop and portable hard drive. If Earl had deleted the footage from Sentinel servers, Drew needed to access his personal cloud account before Miranda realized what was happening. At Sam's house, Drew sent the kids inside while he remained in the truck. His brother Sam Wyatt, a successful contractor who'd built his own slice of rural paradise, understood when Drew said he needed space to handle a situation. With shaking hands, Drew logged into his Sentinel account. The footage from the previous night was still there in his personal cloud storage. He found a 3 a.m. timestamp and clicked play. What he saw made him understand why Earl had vomited. The kitchen camera showed Miranda, his wife of 17 years, moving with practiced efficiency. She wore latex gloves and had laid out various items on the counter: small glass vials, a syringe, and what appeared to be prescription bottles. But that wasn't the horrifying part. The horrifying part was watching her prepare what looked like doctored food and drinks, methodically adding substances from the vials. She labeled containers with masking tape, writing D.E. and J, his and the kids' initials. Then she placed everything in specific locations in the refrigerator and pantry. Drew watched 23 minutes of footage, his wife moving through their kitchen like a chemist preparing poison. The final moments showed Miranda cleaning up, disposing of the gloves and vials in a garbage bag, then carrying the bag outside. The camera lost sight of her, but she returned empty-handed 15 minutes later. Drew's hands were shaking as he copied the footage to his hard drive. His wife, the mother of his children, the woman he'd trusted with everything, was systematically drugging their family. But why? And for how long? As he stared at the screen, Miranda's behavior over the past months began making terrible sense. Her increased interest in cooking special meals, her insistence that they eat together as a family, the gradual changes in how he and the kids had been feeling, the fatigue, the occasional dizziness, the minor memory lapses they'd all attributed to stress. Drew realized they'd been living with a predator who'd been slowly poisoning them. The only question now was what she planned to do once whatever she was giving them reached its intended effect. Chapter 3: Unraveling the Web. Drew spent the next 2 days in Sam's basement, using his cybersecurity skills to dig into Miranda's digital life while the kids believed they were on an impromptu vacation. What he discovered painted a picture of betrayal so comprehensive it challenged everything he thought he knew about his wife. Miranda's laptop, which he'd accessed remotely using credentials she'd never changed, revealed months of encrypted communications. Drew's military training and intelligence gathering served him well as he broke through her amateur security measures. The emails told a story of calculated deception. The primary correspondent was someone named Billy McMillan, whose messages revealed an intimate relationship that had been developing for over 8 months. But Billy wasn't just an affair. He was a nurse practitioner at Millbrook General, Miranda's colleague, and based on their conversations, her co-conspirator. "The insurance money will set us up perfectly," read one message from Billy dated 3 weeks ago. "Just make sure the dosages remain gradual. We can't have the toxicology reports showing acute poisoning. Chronic exposure will look like a tragic medical mystery." Miranda's response chilled Drew to the bone. Drew's military benefits and life insurance totaled $2.8 million. The kids' trust funds add another $400K. "I've been patient this long. A few more weeks won't matter." Drew discovered that Miranda had been researching undetectable poisons for months. Her search history showed queries about ricin, digitalis, and various pharmaceutical combinations that could mimic natural health complications. She'd even researched how long it took for certain toxins to clear a victim's system post-mortem. But the most damaging evidence came from Miranda's medical records, which she'd carelessly stored in her cloud account. She'd been seeing a therapist for family transition anxiety and had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication. Her therapy notes, illegally accessed through her healthcare portal, revealed her true feelings about their marriage. "I feel trapped in this suburban prison," she told Dr. Melody Grant 6 months ago. "Drew's military mentality suffocates me. The kids are extensions of his control. I dream about starting over, somewhere warm, with someone who understands me." The therapist had recommended marriage counseling. Miranda had never mentioned it to Drew. Further digging revealed Billy's background. He'd been fired from 2 previous hospitals for boundary violations with patients and had filed for bankruptcy twice. His social media showed expensive tastes, luxury cars, high-end restaurants, and gambling habits that suggested someone desperate for money. Drew realized his wife and her lover weren't just planning to kill him. They intended to murder his children too, making it look like a tragic family medical emergency that would leave Miranda a grieving widow with a substantial financial windfall. On the 3rd night, Drew made a decision. He called his lawyer, his brother, and then began planning something that would require every skill he'd learned in the military and his cybersecurity career. Miranda and Billy wanted to play a deadly game. Drew was going to make sure he won. He started by documenting everything, creating encrypted backups stored in multiple locations. Then he began crafting communications that would draw his enemies into the open. Using anonymous email accounts and sophisticated IP masking, Drew began sending messages that would make Miranda and Billy believe their plan was being threatened by an outside party. The first message went to Billy's personal email. "I know what you and Miranda are doing. Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at midnight," or "I go to the police." The second message went to Miranda. "Your husband is asking questions about your late-night activities. Time to accelerate the timeline." Drew wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. He was setting a trap. As he worked through the night, his children sleeping safely upstairs at Uncle Sam's, Drew felt the familiar calm that had served him through combat. His enemy had revealed themselves, their tactics, and their weaknesses. Now it was time to destroy them. Chapter 4. The Hunter Becomes Hunted. Drew's plan required precision timing and complete commitment. Over the next week, while maintaining the illusion that he and the kids were still hiding out at Sam's, he orchestrated a psychological campaign designed to fracture Miranda and Billy's partnership. The first phase involved making Miranda believe Billy was losing his nerve. Drew sent carefully crafted messages to Billy's phone, spoofing Miranda's number. "I can't do this anymore. Drew is suspicious. Maybe we should call it off." Billy's panicked response came within minutes. "You can't back out now. I've already quit my job and made arrangements. We're too far in." Drew forwarded Billy's response to Miranda from an anonymous account with a message. "Your boyfriend is getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes." Within hours, Miranda was blowing up Billy's phone. Drew monitored their communications, watching their trust erode in real time. The psychological pressure was working. They were turning on each other. But Drew's real masterstroke came from his military contacts. His former unit commander, Colonel Justin Summers, now worked in Army criminal investigation. A single phone call provided Drew with resources that civilian law enforcement couldn't offer. "You're talking about conspiracy to commit murder, Drew," Justin said over a secure line. "What do you need?" "Evidence that'll stick. These two are smart enough to lawyer up the moment local cops get involved. Send me everything you've got. We'll coordinate with the FBI's domestic terrorism unit." Attempted mass murder of a veteran's family falls under federal jurisdiction. Drew uploaded terabytes of evidence to Justin's secure server. The security footage, the poisoned food analysis, which Sam had helped him conduct using his contractor connections to a private lab, financial records showing Billy's debts, and communications proving premeditation. The second phase of Drew's plan required him to return home. He called Miranda from a grocery store parking lot near their house. "Hey, I think we overreacted." The security company said it was probably just a technical glitch with the cameras. "The kids are getting restless at Sam's." Miranda's relief sounded genuine. "Well, thank God. I was starting to worry you'd found out about." She caught herself. "Found out about what?" "Nothing. Just word drama. When are you coming home?" "Tonight. Can you make that pasta dish the kids love?" There was a pause that lasted too long. "Of course. I'll make sure everything's perfect." Drew smiled grimly. He was counting on it. That evening, Drew entered his house for the first time in over a week. Miranda greeted him with an embrace that felt like a performance. The kids hugged their mother, unaware they were embracing someone who'd been planning their deaths. Dinner was exactly what Drew expected: Miranda's special pasta sauce, bread she'd bake herself, and freshly squeezed lemonade. She served everyone with the same loving attention she'd shown for years, except now Drew knew what was in the food. "This tastes incredible, Mom," Jake said, twirling his fork. "Secret ingredient," Miranda replied, smiling at Drew. "Family recipe." Drew had prepared for this moment. Earlier, he'd swapped out the family's plates with identical ones he'd purchased, each equipped with a small recording device disguised as a decorative element. He'd also taken precautions to avoid consuming anything Miranda prepared. "I'm not very hungry," he said, pushing food around his plate. "Think I picked up a stomach bug." Miranda's eyes flashed with concern that looked real enough to fool the kids. "You should eat something. Keep your strength up. Maybe later." Over the next hour, Drew watched his wife encourage their children to clean their plates, to drink their lemonade, to have seconds of the bread. Each bite they took was captured on audio, documenting her active participation in their poisoning. But Drew had made sure the food was harmless. His final preparation had involved breaking into their house earlier that day and replacing everything in Miranda's poisoning kit with harmless substitutes: food coloring instead of toxins, saline instead of concentrated chemicals. Miranda didn't know her murder weapons had been neutralized. After dinner, as the kids settled in to watch a movie, Drew received a text from Justin. "Team is in position. Subject 2 is en route to your location." Billy was coming to the house, just as Drew had planned. Chapter 5. Closing the net. At 10:47 p.m., Billy McMillan parked 2 blocks away from the Scott house and approached on foot, exactly as Drew had predicted. Drew watched him through the security cameras, noting Billy's nervous energy and the small backpack he carried. Drew had spent the day planting evidence that would panic Billy into making this exact move. A fake police report suggesting the investigation was closing in, combined with a spoofed message from Miranda asking for an emergency meeting, had drawn Billy out of hiding. Miranda was upstairs, believing Drew and the kids were asleep. She'd given them the poisoned food 3 hours ago and was waiting for symptoms that would never come. Drew could hear her pacing in their bedroom, probably wondering why her plan wasn't working. Billy used the spare key Miranda had given him, another detail Drew had discovered in their communications. He entered through the back door, moving with the clumsy stealth of an amateur. Drew was waiting in the kitchen, sitting at the island with a cup of coffee, looking completely relaxed. "Hello, Billy." Billy froze, his hand still on the doorknob. "Drew?" Miranda said that I'd be dead by now." Drew gestured to a chair. "Sit down. We need to talk." Billy's eyes darted around the room, looking for escape routes. The backpack on his shoulder probably contained drugs or syringes, tools for finishing what the poison dinner was supposed to start. "I don't know what you think you know," Billy said, but his voice was shaking. "I know you and my wife have been planning to murder me and my children for insurance money. I know you've been supplying her with pharmaceutical-grade poisons. I know you quit your job last week and maxed out your credit cards, betting on a payday that's never coming." Billy's face went pale. "You can't prove anything." Drew pulled out his laptop and turned it around, showing Billy the security footage from a week ago. "That's my wife preparing to poison us. Want to see the lab report on what she put in our food?" Billy stared at the screen, watching Miranda methodically prepare their deaths. His shoulders sagged as he realized the game was over. "She said you were abusive," Billy whispered. "She said you controlled her, that you were dangerous. And you believe that justified murdering children?" Billy's composure cracked completely. It wasn't supposed to. The kids were supposed to get sick first, go to the hospital. Miranda could control the treatment, make it look like they recovered but suffered complications later. Drew felt a surge of rage, so pure it took all his military discipline to stay seated. "You plan to torture my children to death. It wasn't my idea." Billy's voice rose to a whine. "Miranda planned everything. She said the kids would be better off dead than living with a father like you." Drew stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow over Billy's hunched form. "Except I'm not the problem here. I never was. That's when Miranda appeared in the doorway, wearing a silk robe and an expression of pure shock. "Billy, what are you doing here?" "Drew, what's going on?" Drew turned to face his wife, the woman he'd loved and trusted for 17 years. "Game's over, Miranda. Both of you." Miranda's composure was better than Billy's. She quickly assessed the situation and shifted tactics. "I have no idea why Billy's in our house. Drew, I think he's been stalking me. I was going to tell you, but..." "Stop." Drew's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. "I have recordings of both of you planning this. I have evidence of the poisons. I have your communications, your financial records, and testimony from Earl Rankin about what he saw on our security cameras." Miranda's mask finally slipped. The loving mother and devoted wife disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You always were too smart for your own good." Billy tried to run. He made it exactly 3 steps before Drew's military training took over. A precise strike to the back of Billy's knee dropped him to the floor, followed by a restraint hold that left him conscious but immobilized. "Miranda, call 911, Drew said calmly. "Tell them we have 2 intruders who were attempting to break into our home." Miranda stared at him with naked hatred. "You think you're so clever. You think you've won. I know I have." That's when Miranda pulled a syringe from her robe pocket, probably the same weapon she'd planned to use on Drew while he lay dying from dinner. She lunged forward with desperate fury. Drew caught her wrist easily, applying pressure until she dropped the syringe. It clattered to the floor, its contents spilling across their kitchen tiles. "Federal agents, nobody move." The front door burst open as Justin Summers led a team of FBI agents into the house. They'd been waiting for Drew's signal, watching and listening through the security cameras Drew had given them access to. As Miranda and Billy were handcuffed and read their rights, Drew went upstairs to check on his children. They were both sleeping peacefully, unaware that their mother had spent months planning their deaths. Emma stirred as Drew kissed her forehead. "Dad, what's all the noise downstairs?" "Just some late-night visitors leaving," Drew said softly. "Go back to sleep. Everything's safe now." Chapter 6. Revelations and Reckoning. The investigation that followed uncovered the full scope of Miranda and Billy's conspiracy, revealing depths of depravity that shocked even the federal agents handling the case. Drew spent the next week being debriefed by various law enforcement agencies, each interview peeling back another layer of his wife's deception. Special Agent Gail Gonzalez, the FBI's lead investigator, walked Drew through their findings in a sterile conference room at the federal building. "Your wife had been researching this for almost a year," she said, sliding folders across the table. "She consulted with 3 different therapists, fishing for someone who would support a narrative about you being abusive." Drew opened the first folder, finding transcripts of Miranda's sessions with Dr. Grant. Did she find one? No. Every therapist recommended marriage counseling or suggested she was projecting her own issues. Dr. Grant's notes specifically mentioned that Miranda seemed disappointed when she wouldn't validate her complaints about you. The second folder contained Billy's complete background. Drew learned that Billy McMillan wasn't even his real name. He was William McMahon, a former paramedic who'd been fired for drug theft and had been working under false credentials at Millbrook General. "How did he get hired?" Drew asked. "Identity theft and forged references. Your wife helped him create the fake documents. She was more involved in his criminal history than we initially thought." The third folder was the most disturbing. It contained Miranda's internet search history going back 18 months, showing a progression from general unhappiness to researching divorce settlements, then undetectable poisons, and finally life insurance fraud. She was planning this long before she met Billy, Agent Gonzalez explained. Billy gave her access to pharmaceuticals and medical knowledge, but the core idea was already formed. Drew studied timestamps on the searches. They coincided with Emma and Jake's 14th birthday party, a day he remembered as happy and normal. While he'd been grilling hamburgers and watching his children laugh with friends, Miranda had been upstairs researching ways to kill them all. What about the kids? Did she ever? The lab results showed trace amounts of sedatives in their systems, but nothing fatal. She was building up their tolerance gradually, probably to avoid suspicion when the final doses were administered. Drew closed the folders, processing the magnitude of Miranda's betrayal. How long do I have before this goes to trial? Probably 8 to 10 months. But Drew, there's something else. Agent Gonzalez produced a fourth folder, this one marked with federal security classifications. We found evidence that this wasn't Billy's first rodeo. He's connected to 3 other suspicious deaths in the past 5 years, all involving life insurance payouts to widows who later disappeared. Drew felt his blood chill. You're saying he's a serial killer? We're saying your wife got involved with someone who made a career out of murdering families for money. If you hadn't discovered their plan. Drew nodded grimly. He'd save his children from more than just poisoning. He'd save them from a predator who'd perfected the art of family annihilation. Over the following weeks, as Miranda and Billy sat in federal detention awaiting trial, Drew focused on rebuilding his children's sense of security. The hardest part was explaining why their mother wouldn't be coming home. "Dad," Emma said one evening as they sat on Sam's porch, "did Mom really try to hurt us?" Drew had dreaded this conversation, but his kids deserved honesty. Yes, she and Billy had planned to make us all very sick. Jake looked up from his phone. Because of money? Partly, but also because your mother wasn't happy with her life, and instead of talking about it or getting help, she decided to blame everyone else. Emma leaned against Drew's shoulder. Were we ever safe with her? Drew considered the question carefully. I think for most of your lives, yes. But something changed in her over the past year. She became someone different, someone dangerous. Are you okay, Dad? Jake asked. You seem different too. Drew smiled, recognizing his son's perceptiveness. I'm angry. I'm sad. But I'm also relieved that I found out in time to protect you both. And I'm proud that we survived something that could have destroyed us. The truth was, Drew felt more than survival. He felt vindicated. Every protective instinct that Miranda had mocked, every security measure she'd called overkill, every careful decision she'd labeled as controlling had ultimately saved their lives. His military training hadn't made him paranoid. It had made him prepared. His love for his children hadn't made him overprotective. It had made him vigilant. His refusal to ignore his instincts hadn't made him distrustful. It had made him a survivor. As the weeks passed and the federal case built toward trial, Drew began planning their future. Sam offered to sell him land adjacent to his property, where Drew could build a new house for his family, somewhere without the memories of betrayal, somewhere they could start fresh. But first, he wanted to see Miranda and Billy face justice for what they'd attempted. Drew Scott had always been methodical about protecting what mattered most. Now, he was about to be methodical about ensuring his enemies paid the full price for threatening it. Chapter 7. The Trial of Truth. 6 months later, Drew sat in the front row of federal district court as prosecutors outlined the case against Miranda Scott and William McMahon. The media had dubbed it the Poison Family Trial, and the courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and families of Billy's other suspected victims. Miranda had hired Rodney Kruger, one of the city's most expensive defense attorneys, using funds Drew suspected came from accounts he hadn't yet discovered. She'd lost 30 pounds during her detention and had styled herself to look like a victim. Simple clothes, minimal makeup, and a demeanor that suggested wounded innocence. Billy had taken a different approach. His public defender had negotiated a plea deal in exchange for testimony against Miranda. He sat at the prosecution table, no longer the cocky predator who'd entered Drew's kitchen with murder on his mind. Assistant U.S. Attorney and Wise opened with a presentation that laid out the conspiracy in devastating detail. The security footage played on screens throughout the courtroom, showing Miranda methodically preparing poison in her own kitchen. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Wise said, you will see evidence of a plot so callous, so calculated, that it challenges our understanding of motherhood, marriage, and basic human decency. Kruger's opening defense was predictable. Miranda was a victim of psychological manipulation by a career criminal who'd exploited her marital unhappiness. She was guilty of adultery and poor judgment, but not attempted murder. Drew watched his wife's face during these arguments. She maintained perfect composure, occasionally dabbing her eyes with tissues, playing the role of a woman betrayed by everyone she trusted. The prosecution's case took 3 days to present. They called Earl Rankin, who testified about the security footage and his decision to warn Drew. They called lab technicians who explained the poisons found in the Scott house. They called financial experts who traced the insurance policies and Billy's debts. But the most damaging testimony came from Billy himself. Under oath, Billy detailed every aspect of their plan. He described Miranda's initial approach, her research into undetectable poisons, and her detailed timeline for killing Drew and the children. He revealed that Miranda had insisted the children die first, arguing that Drew would suffer more watching them die before succumbing himself. She said it was poetic justice. Billy testified, his voice barely audible. She wanted Drew to know what it felt like to lose everything. Miranda's mask finally cracked. She leaned forward at the defense table, hissing something to Kruger that the court reporter couldn't catch. The prosecution also presented evidence of Billy's other victims. 3 families in 2 states, all involving mysterious illnesses followed by life insurance payouts to widows who'd later vanished. In each case, Billy had been employed at local medical facilities under false identities. Drew testified on day 4. He walked the jury through his discovery of the plot, his investigation into Miranda's activities, and the night Billy came to their house. "Did you ever suspect your wife was unhappy?" Wise asked. "I knew she'd been distant, but I attributed it to work stress and the kids getting older," Drew replied. "I never imagined she was planning to murder us." "What was your reaction when you first saw the security footage?" Drew looked directly at the jury. "Disbelief, then horror, then determination. Someone was threatening my children, and I was going to stop them." Kruger's cross-examination attempted to paint Drew as a controlling husband whose military background had created an oppressive home environment. But Drew's calm responses and detailed examples of Miranda's autonomy undermined the narrative. "Mr. Scott, isn't it true that you installed those security cameras to spy on your wife?" "I installed them to protect my family from the break-ins that were happening in our neighborhood." "But you used them to violate your wife's privacy." "I used them to document my wife attempting to poison my children." Miranda's defense lasted 2 days. She took the stand in her own defense, tearfully describing years of emotional abuse and control. She claimed Billy had convinced her that Drew was planning to leave her destitute and take the children away. "I never intended to hurt anyone," she sobbed. "Billy said we were just going to make Drew sick enough to scare him, to make him realize he needed to treat me better." But the prosecution's rebuttal was devastating. They played recordings of Miranda's conversations with Billy, including one where she explicitly discussed killing the children. "They'll never forgive me for leaving Drew. It's better if they don't have to choose sides." They presented evidence that Miranda had researched Drew's life insurance policies and the children's trust funds before she'd even met Billy. They showed internet searches for quick-acting heart attack drugs and undetectable child poisons that predated her first contact with Billy by months. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood to deliver their verdict. "On all counts of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant Miranda Scott guilty. On all counts of attempted murder, we find the defendant Miranda Scott guilty. On conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, we find the defendant Miranda Scott guilty." Miranda collapsed at the defense table, her performance finally abandoned. For the first time since her arrest, she looked directly at Drew, and he saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before: pure, undiluted hatred. Judge Cecil Hodge scheduled sentencing for the following month, but indicated that Miranda was facing multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. As the courtroom emptied, Drew felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about validation. The system had confirmed what he'd known from the moment he saw that security footage. He wasn't paranoid, controlling, or abusive. He was a father who'd saved his children from a monster. Emma and Jake, who'd been staying with Sam during the trial, were waiting outside the courthouse. They wrapped their arms around their father as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. "Is it over?" Emma asked. "The trial is," Drew replied. "Now we get to start living again." Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The sentencing hearing 3 weeks later drew an even larger crowd than the trial. Victims' families from Billy's other cases had traveled from across the country to see justice done. Drew sat with Emma and Jake, flanked by Sam and Justin Summers, as Judge Hodge prepared to deliver Miranda's fate. But before sentencing, the judge allowed victim impact statements. Drew had debated whether to speak, but his children had convinced him it was necessary. "Your Honor," Drew said, standing at the podium, "Miranda Scott wasn't just my wife. She was the mother of my children, my partner in building what I thought was a loving home. The betrayal of that trust goes beyond anything I can adequately express." He looked directly at Miranda, who sat shackled at the defendant's table, her attorney having abandoned any pretense of defense. But what I want the court to understand is that this wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was a sustained campaign of deception and attempted murder that lasted months. She researched ways to kill us. She planned how to dispose of our bodies. She researched whether our deaths would look natural enough to collect insurance money. Drew's voice remained steady, controlled. She looked into our children's eyes every day while planning their deaths. She kissed them goodnight while calculating the doses that would stop their hearts. That level of calculated evil deserves the harshest punishment this court can impose. Emma also chose to speak, her 15-year-old voice clear and strong. "I loved my mother. I trusted her completely. Finding out she wanted to kill me and my brother has changed how I see the world, how I trust people, how I feel safe in my own home. But it's also taught me something important, that my dad would do anything to protect us, and that there are people in this world who will fight for what's right even when it's hard." Jake's statement was shorter but equally powerful. "My mom used to tell me that family was everything, that we'd always have each other no matter what happened. She lied about that, but my dad didn't. He saved us when we didn't even know we needed saving." Judge Hodge listened to each statement with the grave attention they deserved. When it came time for sentencing, his words were measured and final. "Miranda Scott, you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit multiple murders, including the planned deaths of your own children. The evidence presented in this case reveals a level of premeditation and callous disregard for human life that shocks the conscience of this court." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the courtroom. "The prosecution has requested life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count, to be served consecutively. The defense has argued for concurrent sentencing with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Miranda remained motionless as Judge Hodge continued. "After careful consideration of the evidence, the victim impact statements, and the aggravating factors present in this case, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on each count of conspiracy to commit murder, to be served consecutively. I additionally sentence you to 25 years for conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, also to be served consecutively." He looked directly at Miranda. "Mrs. Scott, you will never again have the opportunity to harm another family. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in federal prison, and that sentence begins immediately." As the bailiffs prepared to escort Miranda from the courtroom, she finally broke her composure. She turned to shout at Drew, her voice filled with venom. "You destroyed everything. You never deserved those children. You never deserved me." Drew watched his wife, former wife, being dragged from the courtroom, screaming threats and accusations. He felt no satisfaction in her punishment, only relief that the threat was finally, permanently removed. Billy McMahon, who had testified against Miranda in exchange for a plea deal, received 3 consecutive life sentences for his role in the Scott case and his previous murders. Unlike Miranda, he'd accepted responsibility and expressed genuine remorse, which likely saved him from the death penalty. Outside the courthouse, Drew faced the media one final time. The questions were predictable. How did it feel to see his wife sentenced? Would he write a book about the experience? How were the children coping? "My children and I are focused on moving forward," Drew said into the cluster of microphones. "We're grateful for the justice system, for law enforcement, and for the people who supported us through this ordeal. Our priority now is healing and rebuilding our family." A reporter pressed for more details. "Mr. Scott, Do you think you'll ever be able to trust another romantic partner? Drew considered the question seriously. Trust isn't something you give blindly. It's something you earn through consistent actions over time. My children have learned to evaluate people by what they do, not what they say. That's probably a good lesson for all of us. As they walked away from the courthouse, Emma linked her arm through Drew's. Dad, are you okay? Drew looked at his children, resilient, intelligent, and alive because he'd refused to ignore his instincts when something felt wrong. They were walking toward Sam's truck, toward their temporary home, toward a future that was uncertain but no longer threatened by betrayal from within. I'm better than okay, he said. I'm proud of us. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 1 year after Miranda's sentencing, Drew stood in the doorway of their new house, watching Emma and Jake arrange furniture in what would become their permanent home. The house sat on 20 acres adjacent to Sam's property, far enough from Millbrook Heights to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to maintain the kids' friendships and school connections. The design was Drew's own. Open concept for visibility, reinforced construction for security, and most importantly, a workshop where he could continue his cybersecurity consulting from home. He wanted to be present for every moment of his children's remaining time at home. Dad, where do you want the security system control panel? Jake called from the living room. Drew smiled at the question. The new house had an even more sophisticated security system than their old one, but this time it wasn't about protecting against unknown threats. It was about peace of mind for a family that had learned to be vigilant. Kitchen wall, where we can all see it, Drew replied. Emma appeared carrying boxes of her belongings. Are you going to be one of those dads who checks the cameras obsessively? Only until you're both 30, Drew deadpanned. Both kids laughed, real laughter, the kind that had taken months to return after the trial. They'd all undergone therapy, individually and as a family, working through the trauma of Miranda's betrayal. The therapist, Dr. Jesse Stevens, had helped them understand that survival wasn't just about physical safety. It was about learning to trust again, to build new relationships, and to recognize that not everyone who claimed to love them would betray that trust. Drew had been the slowest to heal, not from Miranda's betrayal, but from the guilt of not recognizing the threat sooner. Dr. Stevens had helped him understand that Miranda's deception was sophisticated precisely because she'd built it on a foundation of genuine love and trust that had lasted for years. You weren't naive, Dr. Stevens had told him during one session. You were normal. People who love their families don't spend their time looking for signs that their spouse might be a would-be murderer. If they did, no one would ever be able to maintain healthy relationships. The healing process had also brought unexpected connections. Earl Rankin, the security installer whose warning had saved their lives, had become a family friend. He'd been dealing with his own trauma from witnessing Miranda's preparations for murder, and he'd found solace in knowing that his decision to act had prevented a tragedy. Drew's military contacts had also proven invaluable. Justin Summers had helped him navigate the media attention and legal proceedings, while other veterans in his network had provided security consulting opportunities that allowed Drew to work exclusively from home. The community response had been overwhelming. When news broke about Drew's plans to build a new house, contractors throughout the region had volunteered materials and labor. Sam coordinated the effort, creating a project that brought together dozens of families who wanted to help the Scotts rebuild. It's not charity, Sam had explained to Drew when he'd initially resisted the help. It's community. These people need to feel like they're doing something positive after hearing about something so awful. The house raising had taken on the atmosphere of an old-fashioned barn raising, with families bringing food, children playing in the yard, and neighbors working side by side to create something beautiful from tragedy. Now, a year later, Drew watched his children claim their space in their new home and marveled at their resilience. Emma had thrown herself into art therapy and was creating stunning pieces that processed her experience through color and form. Jake had developed an interest in cybersecurity like his father, spending hours learning programming languages and network security protocols. Both kids had grown closer to Drew, but not in an unhealthy, dependent way. They'd learned to appreciate his protective instincts while maintaining their own independence and critical thinking skills. The doorbell chimed, and Drew opened it to find Earl Rankin holding a bottle of champagne and wearing a nervous smile. "Thought you might want to celebrate your first night in the new house," Earl said. Drew clasped Earl's shoulder, pulling him into the house. "Your family here, Earl. Always." As evening fell, the five of them, Drew, Emma, Jake, Sam, and Earl, sat on the back porch of the new house, looking out over rolling hills that stretched to the horizon. The security lights cast a gentle glow around the property, and the soft hum of the protection system provided a subtle soundtrack of safety. "Dad," Emma said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't installed those cameras?" Drew considered the question that had haunted him for months. "Every day. But I've learned not to dwell on alternate histories. We can't change what almost happened. We can only be grateful for what had happened." Jake looked up from his phone, where he'd been monitoring the new security systems app. "All clear, Dad. No threats detected." "Good," Drew replied. "But remember, the best security system is staying aware of your surroundings and trusting your instincts." Earl raised his glass of champagne. "To the Scott family, may your new foundation be as strong as your father's determination to protect you." They toasted as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across their new beginning. Drew felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or justice, and everything to do with the simple fact that his children were safe, happy, and learning to trust the world again. Miranda was serving her life sentences in a federal prison 2 states away. Billy was in a different facility, also facing the remainder of his life behind bars. Their conspiracy had been thoroughly exposed, their victims vindicated, and their ability to harm anyone permanently eliminated. But more importantly, Drew had kept his promise to protect what mattered most. His children were alive, healthy, and growing into strong, thoughtful adults who understood that real love meant sacrifice, vigilance, and the courage to act when action was needed. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Drew Scott sat surrounded by the people who truly mattered, in a home built on genuine security rather than false promises. He'd learned that the greatest victory wasn't defeating his enemies. It was preserving what they'd tried to destroy. His family was whole. His children were safe. His foundation was unshakable. And that was more than enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.